Okay, guys. Um, Welcome to the Consumer and Buyer Behavior Postgraduate Marketing course. Let me quickly introduce myself. I think Claudia has actually mentioned that, but basically what happened for this semester is that there will be 3 lectures teaching you guys together, right? So what will happen is that I will teach you guys this week, and then after 2 weeks, I will be teaching another 3-week period covering some topics on consumers' individual behavior, right? The individual aspect of consumption and decision making. And then after that, Rakesh is going to take up and teach the rest of these contents. And throughout the whole course, Claudia will be coordinating the structure and give you information on course assessment, exam, and stuff like that. And also for every week's lecture, we have 3 excellent teaching facilitators, Alexandra, Rosie, and Lynn, all right? And they will be helping you guys when it comes to group discussion. They will move around and then to help you to answer some questions, or if you got some other questions you want to ask or some points you want to mention, but you don't want to mention to me, you can mention to them, all right? It's a collaborative teaching environment, basically. And a brief introduction of myself. I did my PhD in marketing at Monash University back to almost 10 years ago. And then after that, I went back to China because I'm a Chinese citizen, all right? I grew up in there. And I teach at the university. I'm not sure if you have heard of it, Sufi, Xinan Caida, right? I basically spent roughly 7 years there before I moved overseas to the United Kingdom. I taught there for another year. And it was fun, but unfortunately, I don't really particularly enjoy the weather there. It was like Melbourne, but 100 times worse. So eventually, I decided that no, I had enough. So I moved back to Australia and then started my faculty position career last year, right? So this is the first time that I'll be teaching this course to you guys. But actually, I've been teaching this course, consumer behavior, not only in China, but also in the UK, and now I'm teaching it here again, all right? So it's kind of like interesting to see how the different groups of students come to take this course. But fortunately for us as teacher, the contents and the theories and the frameworks are basically the same. So what I would hope is that, first of all, my way of teaching is that I will speak, obviously, most of the time. But there will be 2 group activities from time to time that will require you guys to reflect upon the theories and the concepts that we have just introduced to you. And then you will be encouraged to discuss with your teammates or friends sitting beside you, and then to come up with your own perspective and viewpoints. All right, there are 2 reasons for that. One is that we hope that this will keep you constantly engaged in the classroom environment. And another reason, obviously, is that we want to keep you awake, all right? So if you feel tired or half delusional, let me know, all right? And we can take a break. I don't even know how many breaks we're going to take, but let's improvise. I imagine there will just be 1. So roughly midway through the lecture, around an hour and a half later, we might take a 10 minutes break. But if you feel extremely tired, or if you want me to stop a little bit, and then just let me know. I mean, the classroom is supposed to be interactive, and I really don't want to make it like a 1-week communication process, me talking and you guys sitting there half dreaming, half listening to me, which would not be fun, all right? So like I said, if you have any questions, let me know. If there are some particular theories or concepts that you want me to explain a little bit further, just pause and then ask me, all right? Because if you remain silent most of the time, then I will basically just assume that you guys have no problem with the progress of the lecture, and now we just keep on going. And also, I have to warn you guys that one of the bad habits of mine is that when I speak, sometimes I speak faster and faster to the point that even I myself don't know what I'm talking about, okay? So if you think that I'm talking too fast or too slow, again, raise your hand, let me know, and then we can adjust, okay? So last week, Claudia basically have introduced to you guys the general assessment and other logistic aspects of this course, all right? It's meant to be introductory, but at the same time, compared to undergraduate courses and the PhD qualification coursework, the biggest difference is that for this particular course, we have two goals in mind. One is that we will try to be comprehensive, introducing to you guys not only the most basic concepts, fundamental and basic concepts in consumer behavior literature. We also want you guys to be practical, trying to link these theories and frameworks and concepts back to your daily life, because we're all consumers, right? You may not be a buyer, but you're definitely a consumer. And hence the reason why we mention both terms in the title of this course, all right? Buyer and consumer. The difference being that if you are the buyer, you're basically making the decision, purchase, right? You're buying the products or the service, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the consumer yourself. You might buy it for someone else, in which case then the mental process and the decisions that you're going to make might actually be different compared to when you are actually the consumer and the buyer as a whole. Okay? There are some subtle differences there. But whatever the theory is, most of the time you should be able to relate the theory and the framework back to your daily experience and your life. And I want you guys to keep that in mind and to constantly to try to think of how this abstract and symbolic stuff can actually be linked back to some concrete phenomenon or behavior in your daily life. So what we are going to do today is we're going to introduce you guys some behavioral theories, most of which have actually emerged during the last 20 years, all right? They are really important because these kind of theories, they will basically help you to better understand the consumer. And also, these theories would be very different when you, for example, open the textbook that's been published like 10 years or 20 years ago. You will notice that there's a lot of differences there, okay? In other words, for the consumer research, basically what we have been doing is that every 5 years or 10 years, you will see a fundamental change of the basic frameworks or theories that are actually guiding our understanding of consumer behavior. So for example, about 10 years ago, our understanding of how consumers consume and how they make decisions is quite drastically different from what we currently know of the buyer behavior, right? There's a lot of differences and a lot of evolution. So even though we actually have two components, major components to cover today, I think I will probably spend most of the time talking about the first one, right? The key topics, the key emerging theories and themes that we have actually discovered during the last 10 or 20 years. And then after that, I will move on to briefly talk about consumer culture theory. This one is even newer compared to the first one, all right? This basically stems from our observation that consumers normally act as a group. In other words, when you're making your consumption decisions, not only you consider yourself, but you also consider how your behavior, how your decision making will also affect the people around you, and how other people's behavior will affect you consequently. We have to keep all this stuff in mind, hence the term consumer culture theory, CCT. And then after that, we will briefly mention what do we mean by innovation. Nowadays, due to the proliferation of the technology, there's a lot of new products in this world. And sometimes we might find that, okay, this stuff is really new, it's fascinating, it's exciting. But some other time we might find them to be kind of like boring, right? They claim themselves to be new products, but we actually don't think so. And why is that the case? Why sometimes we feel like some new product is more advanced than the other one, all right? What's the psychological principles underlying it? And then once you are able to grasp the principle behind this one, then this will better help you. For example, when you are designing the new products for a firm, then what are the general principles that you should keep in mind when doing so? Okay? So basically, that's the general theories or frameworks that we're going to cover today. And by the way, I hope you guys are able to hear me clearly with this. Thank you. Because I normally didn't really get used to clicking this stuff on my collar, but I hope that it works. So before we start, we have to introduce to you guys two most fundamental concepts in marketing theory. Most fundamental means that no matter you are taking courses in foundations of marketing or some introductory courses, or to the most advanced degree in marketing, no matter what you do, no matter what theories you subsequently going to know, these stuff are actually at the core of the marketing theory. basically, what is the definition of marketing? Marketing is about the value exchange process, right? As marketers, we try to satisfy consumers' needs and wants. And this is the most important concept and guidelines. So before we even start, here is a brief description of the need versus wants. And I want you guys to take a minute or so to reflect upon these two concepts and to think about the most important difference between these two. In other words, we all know the definition. They're simple, right? They're on the screen already. You see them. But that's not really important because we all know what roughly these two terms generally refer to. So what I want you guys to figure out instead is, what do you think is the most important difference between these two key concepts here? In other words, we know roughly what need is, even though we don't refer to a textbook. We also know what we want, all right? Even though we don't know the definition, but you know that you want to eat, you want some luxury product, all right? You want to get a university degree after your undergraduate degree, stuff like that. We all know that we have the gut feelings about these two terms. But what I want you to figure out or to think about is, what is the most important difference between these two concepts, okay? Probably I'll give you 1 minute to think about that. And feel free to discuss it with your friends or teammates sitting around you.
Yeah.
Okay, time's up. Or it may not be so, but whatever. So any group or anyone has any idea on this? What do you think is the biggest difference here? If you look at the definition, it's really dry and boring, isn't it? The motive, depending on consumers' personal situation, of course, it's always context dependent. And then when you move on to the wants, it's a specific manifestation of the motive. Again, it's pretty tricky, isn't it? Yes, please.
Our group just talked about it. The
Yeah.
need is more present-oriented versus the wants is future-oriented.
Future-oriented.
Idea.
Yeah.
Need is addressing something that is currently needed or is motivated by biological basic needs. And then the wants is something that is linked towards achieving a goal or an objective.
Okay, thank you. So basically, you think that wants is more like future-oriented, aimed at achieving something,
Yeah.
and it's goal-oriented, basically, right? So for example, self-enhancement is actually a form of wants and not a form of needs.
True. Correct.
Any disagreement on that one? So for example, if you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what is the top level?
Self-actualization.
Self-actualization, right? And that one sounds pretty similar to what you have described, isn't it? Like self-achievement. I basically have done what I want to do, and I feel like my life is satisfied and is fulfilled. But Maslow basically labeled it as a hierarchy of needs, not hierarchy of wants. So probably it belongs to this category, not here. So what you have given is actually a classic example of the top tier consumer needs, or human needs, basically. And it's not really a form of wants, yes. Any other contributions to this particular one? Someone else might argue, okay, need is really general, right? It's not really target specific. So for example, I feel hungry. That's my need. I want to eat, right? I need to eat. And then I grab a burger. So I want a burger. And that become my wants, is it? But can you say I need a burger? Sounds also plausible, isn't it? Sounds plausible. So whenever you actually find that it's tricky actually to distinguish between these two, I want you guys to think about it from a slightly different perspective. Have you heard of the UK band Coldplay? They have a song which is called Fix You. There's a line of lyrics there. When you get something you want, but not something you need. And apparently, the protagonist is pretty not quite happy there, right? And because he feels like he gets something that he's supposed to have, but it's not necessarily what really something he or she needs. What does this mean, basically? Actually, the distinction between these two is tricky, yet very simple, all right? When we talk about consumers' needs, they are largely, actually you were correct in that respect, they are largely biological. In other words, when you are born, you naturally develop your desire to satisfy various forms of needs, no matter they are basic or advanced. In other words, if you feel like your personal safety is threatened, you want to be protected. That's a need for safety. If you feel thirsty or if you feel hungry, you want to buy some food to eat, some water to drink. They are also a form of needs at a very lower level, relatively speaking, right? And if you feel like, okay, my life is empty, all right, I haven't done anything. I just sit in the couch watching YouTube all day and, didn't do anything else meaningful. And I feel kind of like empty and hollow inside. And I'm not happy with my life. And that is also a form of need deprivation, meaning that you want to achieve something to make your life more fulfilled, more satisfied. There are all kinds of needs here, all right? But what distinguishes between needs and wants is that when we're talking about what consumers want, they're not necessarily something that you biologically need at the very beginning, but marketers or the culture in which you grow up will imbue you with the concept that this is a good thing, you'd better get it. And then you all of a sudden develop the desire or the wanting perspective. All right, I want that stuff because the culture that I grow up, because people around me, because the information that I've received constantly suggests to me that this is a good thing. I need to have them. So in this case, we might see that want is actually culture and education specific or dependent. In other words, when a baby is born, he wants to be protected. He wants food and he wants water. If he doesn't get it, he will start to cry. But a baby seldom wants a Louis Vuitton bag, right? If a 3-month-old newborn is crying, I want a Louis Vuitton bag, well, that would be very creepy and scary, right? It doesn't happen that way. But when a 20 years ago is saying that, okay, next birthday, I'm going to buy myself some luxury products because my friends say that they're gorgeous because I want them. And then we're talking about the consumer wants, right? In other words, the needs and the wants, they are both the targets that as marketers we try to satisfy or to provide to the consumers. But there are just some limited number of needs that when you are born, you already have them. So in order to create some extra demand in the marketplace, the marketers, they are really smart and naughty. They try to create something that you don't necessarily need. But gradually, we will tell you that, okay, these are good stuff. Guess what? When you have them, there will be such and such good benefits. And then gradually, you develop the want to want this stuff, okay? So depending on the culture, obviously, there are some products that are highly wanted or desired in some particular society, but not necessarily in the other countries or regions. So for example, luxury products, they are much more popular in Asia rather than in Western country. I'm not saying that they are not popular in Western country, but they are less popular, relatively speaking, okay? So basically, these are the key distinguishing features between these two concepts. But the bottom line is this: they are all important when it comes to the marketplace. And as marketers and as firms, we try to satisfy them. And especially for the wants, we might be able to create some consumer wants that may not be there in the first place. But with some smart campaign, some smart advertisement, we might be able to create the want subsequently. Okay? I'm okay with this, these two concepts. I'm hoping that my explanation doesn't make you guys more confused than, yes, please.
So I can understand in the lower level of Maslow hierarchy,
Yeah.
the needs is a bit different with the want, which means need might be like basic requirements and want might be it's better to have, but it's okay not to have. But how about the higher level of Maslow hierarchy?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, the esteem. So if I want to purchase a social identity,
Yeah.
I want a Louis Vuitton as well, which is
Mm-hmm.
similar with I want a Louis Vuitton. You know what I mean?
No? That's okay. Can you please rephrase or to...
So in the higher level of Maslow
Yeah.
hierarchy,
Yeah.
if I want the social identity, I need a Louis Vuitton
Yeah.
to show my social identity,
Yeah.
right? But I also can say I want a Louis Vuitton.
Mhm.
So let's say.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I think I get your point. So basically, now we're talking about some, like how to map the wants into the needs, right? Because basically, the need and the want, they are highly intertwined with each other. It doesn't really mean that if you have a form of need, that it can't be want. It's not really necessarily that case. So for example, if you think that, okay, I have the need to be identified as a particular group of consumer, or I feel like I want to be recognized by my friends, right? For example, if you have that kind of desire, then there are different forms for you to achieve that. The form actually will be manifested in the different items that you want. But the need, basically, is still there. It's the same. Let's put an extreme case. For example, if you say that, okay, I want to realize myself because I feel like my life is not really happy and completely fulfilled, all right? And I want to do something to achieve that. For some people, they might, for example, donate money or donate organs after death, right? In a way that they feel like, okay, this is a way that I can contribute to the society to make it a better place. For some other people, they might feel like, okay, I want to make sure that I am distinct individual and I'm completely different than the other people so that I can establish my own identity. Then, depending on the culture, you will have different manifestation of this particular desire. And we call them the different forms of wants. So for example, in Asia or in China, for example, you might say, okay, probably the simplistic way is that I purchase some luxury product, which is highly expensive and not easily afforded by other people, right? I buy it, but some other people cannot afford that. So I will feel like this is a way to help me to distinguish myself for the others, and I feel like I'm happy and satisfied. Whereas for someone else, for example, they might think, okay, I will go to gym, because gym training is fun, but it's also a painful process. Not everyone is able to endure that. So instead of purchasing some highly expensive and luxury products, I may choose a different way, engaging in some sort of like physical activity. And then my want to go to the gym is actually still a self-fulfillment process. And that is different from purchasing some luxury products. There are different ways to achieving the same end goal. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
So basically, there are some type of wants that might not be derived from the need, all right? But there are other types of needs that can be manifested into some more subtle and different formats of wants. So for example, I feel thirsty, I need to quench my thirst. That's my biological need. But when it comes to purchasing what kind of drinks you want, for example, you say, I'm highly loyal to Coca-Cola. I hate Pepsi, right? I don't know about you. I don't, basically. But let me just give you an example. So you will say, okay, where's the Coke? All right, I can't find it. So I will endure my thirsty feeling, all right? And I'm not going to purchase Pepsi because I hate it. In that case, then, we basically are talking about the need satisfaction, but you can't find a particular item or product that you want, okay? So in other words, there are situations that these two are highly interrelated to each other, but there are also situations in which these items are purely wanted and they have nothing to do with the need satisfaction, right? A little bit tricky, but I hope that you guys will gradually develop the hunch to understand the difference, the subtle difference there, okay? And don't worry if you still feel, yeah, the more you talk, the more confused I feel. Don't worry. As we proceed, then gradually we'll come up with more examples. And then when you were able to relate them back to these concepts and other theories and frameworks, gradually you will be able to better distinguish between them and to have a better understanding of this stuff. Okay? So let's move on. How do we study consumer behavior? So basically, marketing, here I'm talking about marketing, okay? I'm not talking about the consumer behavior. But when it comes to marketing, just have a guess. When is this particular discipline or this major established formally in the history of human science? And have a guess. When was it first established or recognized as a major discipline? In other words, many years ago, people even don't view marketing as a science or social science. They will feel like, yeah, there's something that we call marketing and a marketer, right? But they are just some sort of like auxiliary or adjacent topics which are really similar to management and economics, but we don't think that they are established science. They're not an independent field of study. But then, have a guess. When was it roughly established as a formal discipline or major that gradually, nowadays, we call it marketing? The year is roughly 1950s, okay?
Industrial Revolution?
No, not that early, actually, unfortunately. We see some forms of marketing activities and marketing behavior, but at that moment, we don't really feel like this is a major called marketing. This is some phenomenon that we think that are really similar to economics and psychology and sociology, but we don't call it marketing. Yeah, it is only after 1950s that gradually the first journal in this field, which is called the Journal Marketing, 1952, I think, right, roughly, and then we start to recognize that, okay, here is actually a discipline that deal with the firms and the consumers, and that was highly different from our traditional perspective on management and economics, and we'd better isolate it and treat it as an independent field of study. And nowadays we call it marketing. And then after another 30 years, we see an emergence of the new discipline, which is called consumer behavior. In other words, if you look back, the history of consumer behavior is actually no longer than 40 years. All right, it's really new. And because it's so new, the approach that we adopted when studying it is called multidisciplinary approaches. So basically what you see here, they are all fundamental, traditional, sociological, and economic fields that we basically borrow the theories from them and then to wrap them together to study how we consume and how the firms engage and interact with the consumers. All right? So for example, anthropology. These basically deal with human behavior, but it's normally related to the culture. In other words, we study a particular group of consumers, and then we look at the context in which this consumption behavior is taking place. And then we try to figure out, okay, compared to consumers in the United States, how consumers in China, in Japan, in South Korea, how they behave slightly differently compared to the consumers in the Western world, right? What are the processes that engage when it comes to particular consumption behavior? When you're buying something, would your mindset and with the decisions that you consider or decision criteria that you consider be different compared to those in the other culture or other country, all right? And this one is really similar to sociology, right? Really similar, but there's a subtle difference. When it comes to anthropology, we normally try to look at this perspective from a subjective perspective. Normally what we do is that we will observe what people do, how they consume, and then we will use some qualitative research methods such as interviewing, having a chat with them, or focus group. In a focus group, that's basically what you are doing right now, sitting around the table and then have a talk on some particular topic. in which case there will be some facilitator sitting there, but their role would not be facilitator. They will be called a moderator. Basically, they will start the topic, and then they will guide you through some discussion, and at the same time observing what you are going to talk about. And then we will try to figure out what exactly is causing this particular consumption to take place, and how that would be different from people from other societies or other countries. But when it comes to sociology, there are two key differences compared to anthropology. First of all, for sociology, our approach is largely quantitative. All right? In other words, the researchers try to detach themselves from the phenomena. We try to be really impartial. We try not to get ourselves involved into the whole process. Instead, what we will do is that we will use survey, we will use some questionnaire, ask you guys to take in these numbers. And then we will make some comparison, for example, which group have a higher purchase likelihood compared to some other group. And another difference is that for sociology, we try to bring the policy and the law into the investigation as well. All right? So for example, alcohol consumption, if it becomes a problem, then what should the policymaker do in order to disencourage some disruptive consumption behavior? All right? They are so closely related to each other that sometimes we treat them as the same. Okay? But there are some subtle differences, even though they're really similar. Psychology. This is actually the most important discipline when we try to understand how consumers consume. All right? I would say that among all the theories that we're going to teach you guys for this course, again, it's a rough estimate, but I would say that more than 80% of the theories that we're going to teach you guys actually derive directly from psychology. All right? Because basically, think about it. What is a consumer? Consumer is also a human being. Right? And as a human being, you basically will go through the same exact psychological process when you are making a decision. When it's really general, we call it decision making in psychology. When the decision is specifically related to the consumption, we change the term, we change the name. It's called consumer decision making, hence the theory of consumer behavior. All right? So most of the cases when studying consumer psychology, we actually borrow directly the theory from the psychological discipline, but we'll make some modifications because when it comes to particular purchase context or situation, the theories that we need might be slightly different. They will still be roughly the same, but we need some modification be added, right, to this particular theory. Economics. This is basically what we are going to focus today, all right, especially when it comes to some new trend in studying consumer behavior. We're going to introduce to you guys a lot of interesting theories in relation to that, which are actually directly derived from economics. Starting from 2000, the year of 2000, I think Nobel Prize now start to place a great emphasis on behavioral economics, such that in recent 10 years, we see 2 Nobel Prize winners that actually come not from the traditional economic discipline, but what they have been actually doing is called behavioral economics, right? Behavioral economics is fundamentally different. Actually, it's contradictory to what traditional economic theories predict people would behave. What is the traditional perspective from the economic perspective? Basically, their theory is really simple and fundamental, okay? They assume that everyone is a utility maximizer. What is utility? Utility basically means the happiness, the usefulness of using something, all right? So for example, I drink a water and I feel happy. Then I would feel like I have some utility from consuming that one. I buy a cheeseburger and turn out to be crap. I throw it away. In which case, I feel like my utility is negative, all right? I don't know what utility is, but I do know that from using this particular thing, I'm not happy, all right? Compared to when I haven't started eating it, now I feel like I'm actually worse off. I'd better not have eaten that stuff. In which case, we're talking about the negative utility. So basically, traditional economic theories basically argue that the consumers, actually everyone, all right, as long as you're rational, you should be the one who try to maximize your utility for yourself, okay? In other words, you should never donate money to charity. Why? Because by donating money, you are decreasing your own utility. Initially, you have $10. Now you donated $1. You end up with $9, and you are actually worse off. All right? And they call this kind of behavior irrational. Actually, it's a very gentle word. Another common word to describe it would be stupid. All right? If you are irrational, that basically means that you are stupid. But actually, in the real world, we observe that many people, they are engaging in behavior that are not really consistent with the utility maximizing perspective, right? We donate money. We spend our time helping the friends, or even sometimes helping the stranger who have actually no personal relationship with us, but we want to help them, right? We don't know why, but we want to do that. And why is that the case? And why could this actually, in a way, indirectly, eventually enhance your utility? This might happen, but from the traditional economic theory's perspective, this doesn't make sense, okay? So basically what happens right now is that in the behavioral economics discipline, they no longer use the fundamental concepts of utility maximization, but they use an approach which is called interpretation. We go to the field, we go to the real world, we observe what people actually do, and then we try to develop some new theory, which is called the behavioral economics, that will still help us to predict what you are going to do. But we no longer assume that you are a utility maximizer, but instead we try to make sense why you are doing that. And in so doing, we'll develop some new theories to explain that. But it's definitely not utility maximization, that's for sure, okay? And finally, history and geography. History, basically we studied how consumer behavior evolved over the last decade or compared to 100 years ago. The way that we make a purchase decision, the composition of household, would they be actually different compared to 50 years ago, 100 years ago, right? Again, that's really similar to sociology and anthropology, okay? They're not exactly the same, but they're really closely related to each other. And finally, geography. We study how physical location would actually affect consumers' behavior. For example, when it comes to drinking wine, I believe it's a much bigger problem in Russia than in China. And that's kind of strange, isn't it? Because basically these two countries, we actually have the same longitude, but we have different latitude, right? So could the temperature actually be contributing to the different rate of the binge drinking in different countries? Would that happen? Or alternatively, when you move to a different climate, again, will this affect our consumption behavior, right? So one key message here is that when we are talking about these different disciplines or different fields, we're not saying that they are mutually exclusive, such that for a particular behavior, if you borrow economics, there's no way you should use psychological theories in addition to that to explain it. It doesn't happen that way, right? Basically, what will happen is this. Think about this as a problem-solving process. There's something happening in this world, and as a consumer psychologist, you really want to understand why this is happening. And all these fields actually, probably if you don't feel comfortable with the term field, you can use a different word, which is called perspective, right? The lens through which you look at them and then try to make sense of it. Depending on the perspective you use, the conclusions that you get will be different. But here's a key message here. When it comes to understanding consumers' behavior, there's no right or wrong approach or perspective. Of course, there are some fundamental principles like 2 + 2 should be 4. If you say, hey, it must be 5, I'm done arguing with you because, it doesn't make sense at all, right? But when it comes to the particular phenomenon or a particular behavior, there are different ways that we might look at it. And depending on the discipline you are in or the approach you use, you might get a drastically different conclusion. And whatever conclusion you get, this will still better help us understand why this particular thing is happening. And then we might be able to use the conclusion or the theory and then to help us better understand the consumer and to make strategic firms' behavior, whatever, okay? So, for example, if you try to study alcohol consumptions, and then here's an example of the different conclusions that you might get, or let's say the different phenomena that you might observe depending on the perspective that you are taking. And here I'm not going to go through them because they are pretty much straightforward and simple, right? So for example, why some people are more likely to be binge drinking than someone else, why they're more addicted to that. If you try to study this from the psychological perspective, you might find that from the research on personality, there's a personality trait which is called addictive personality type. In other words, this group of people, they not only more easily get hooked up by alcohol, they actually are more easily get hooked up by virtually almost anything, right? Like ice cream or drugs, whatever, you name it, or even binge watching YouTube. This might happen, right? Because their personality type is such that they are easily get hooked up by a particular consumptive behavior, even though it might be destructive for their personal well-being, okay? And here I want you guys to think about the fast food consumption and then refer back to the structure here to think roughly if you were to study consumers' consumption behavior of fast food. And here we're talking really generally about fast food. In other words, please don't limit your discussion to McDonald's or KFC, all right? As long as it's fast food. And then try to think of it from these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 perspectives. Just ignore the anthropology, because to be honest with you guys, I think for fast food consumption, probably anthropology is not quite applicable, right? In other words, when we're talking about the different perspectives, it doesn't mean that you have to use every single one of them in order to better and more comprehensively understand something. It doesn't work that way, right? Sometimes we borrow psychology because we think that it's more relevant. Some other time, because that's basically all we can do. For example, like me, right? I study psychology and I'm doing research on consumer behavior. And if you force me to use geography to actually examine that, I will still be able to do that, but I will definitely do a very, very bad job because that's not my strength, all right? So here, I want you guys to simply to ignore anthropology, but try to think about two things. First, from the perspective of sociology, psychology, economics, history, and geography, if you were to study consumers' consumption of fast food, what kind of things would you do to study it, all right? And the second is that what kind of conclusion, roughly, or benefits that you think you will be able to get or to provide to the marketer or to the firms that are providing fast food to the consumer, all right? And the facilitators will basically, I think they have already given you the spreadsheet that actually have these concepts there. So I want you guys to have a discussion with your teammates or your friends, and then I will give you guys, I don't know, 10 minutes to talk about it, all right? Probably you are going to talk about it for only 5 minutes, and then the other 5 minutes you are talking about something else, but whatever. So let's resume back to our class in 10 minutes' time.
But it's also not example of this is very realistic. They acquire
That's why they want to create a group that will make it in McDonald's, so that they will come back on their own. They have moments with the parents, they can hang out when they're out there, they have their own peace. So they're
and element of being a happy going on and it's now. And already so maybe that has happened. Like it was the first in one of that source. And then the family has just been growing. I can't think that's very in fact, it's like
and they were backwards. Yeah. They were backwards. But then they have the option to give the people the feeling that they're healthier, the whole range of salads that they have. Now you can actually change your brand for salad. It's like smoothie on there. People feel like they're not buying that.
Great. Yeah, right. Thanks.
You really want to go out. some I once I got to remember one of them. I don't know where it was today. It was like kind of huge, very tall, dressed actually very weird. He was like, yeah, I'm getting out of here. He was like, hello, and then came out the other door. You find that people sometimes streets, like they get $1 and they buy the cheeseburgers they have inside. It's not regular people unless you're like New York, Central, where gardens.
Okay, guys. I hope the discussion went well. And the reason I stopped you guys right now is because some of you guys look unusually happy, and then I know that you must have finished your discussion and must have moved on to something else. So before we try to elicit the response from you, have you actually figured out the way to do this? I mean, obviously you try to brainstorming and then try to think of, desperately try to think of whatever you can think of, right, to fill in these forms. But actually, have you figured out the way to do it? Normally, for example, when we try to determine what kind of approach should we use, what is the simplistic and the most straightforward starting point? It's not really try immediately jump right onto this topic, but instead, normally what would happen is that you can actually think of some key terms or phrases from the different perspective, and then you try to link these key terms or phrases to the phenomenon that you are examining, and then you try to see how well they would be linked together, right? So for example, for sociology, we normally talk about policy making. We talk about a group of consumers. These are keywords, right? And for economics, it's about price, monetary compensation, finance. These are the keywords. For psychology, obviously, there are so many keywords, but feel free to fill in the blank. History, we're talking about the cultural difference it might be, right? We're talking about the change of years. We're talking about 500 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, the evolution of the trends, right? And eventually geography, location, country, regions. So once you have determined the keywords, you will be able to link them back to this particular phenomenon. And why are we asking you guys to doing that? This is because that you are going to work on a group project. And even though for this course, our primary focus would be on psychology and economics, actually, if you wish, you can still actually approach your project either from sociological or anthropological perspective, if you really want, right? But before we move on even further, anyone volunteer to contribute your ideas on that? So for example, fast food consumption, if you were to look at it from a sociological perspective, then what kind of things would you be interested in examining? And what kind of things would you be doing that you think would be highly relevant to the marketer, or at least to understanding the phenomena here? Yes, please.
Segmenting the market into different demographics
Uh-huh.
and how each of those demographics are affected by the stimuli, or in this case, the fast food chain. So for example, in our group, if McDonald's is in the US, it's considered like a low-income area.
Uh-huh.
If it's in let's say Australia here, it's properly branded. I mean, it looks good. So
Really?
it's more on.
Sorry,
well,
yeah.
it's more.
Go on, please.
It attracts people from like more affluent, something like that.
McDonald's.
Yeah, or less lower income, less lower incomes.
Okay, thank you. So there might be some sort of like different demographic groups
Yeah.
that might consume this particular brand of products
Yeah.
when it comes to the US versus Australia.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other opinions on that? Yes, please.
I would like to ask how they came to the conclusion that sociology is
Mhm.
opposed to a geographical perspective, because if you
Would you
look
be
at
able to answer that?
geographic,
Yeah.
from the perspective that geographical region, then that might be high in geographical.
Yeah, actually, it is tied. It is
Yeah,
tied.
so you can kind of see how they're very linked from different perspectives of linked. So you might think if it's a sociological perspective, it's the culture of that area, and the geographical perspective, you're only looking at that region.
Oh.
So basically, I think you were trying to say that, okay, in the US and in Australia, geographically they're different, but you try to look at it from the cultural perspective as well, right? But still, I'm wondering that why did you have that particular conclusion? Why do you think that in Australia actually it's more affluent people that's going to buy McDonald's?
As in, he meant that as in the Queen Street Mall, we still have
Oh, okay.
McDonald's.
Yeah.
And it's like the most posh, like the nicest street of
Uh-huh.
England. Whereas the example like he gave from US,
Uh-huh.
the McDonald's there is not where you would want to go.
Yeah.
So that kind of a social, like already made
Mhm.
norm about McDonald's. That's the difference in
Right,
the two countries.
right.
So-
Okay, thank you for your
Yes.
contribution. I see your point. So basically, you were saying that people's concept of the brand positioning
Yeah.
might actually be different, such as in the United States. Well, it is obviously it is fast food, but it is considered kind of like low class, and we normally, for example, in Manhattan or in some high-class shopping mall, it's unlikely that we see that kind of food chain stores there, right? Okay. Psychology. Yes.
We'd like to talk about the psychology of why people prefer consuming fast food.
Uh-huh.
First, I think it's because it's cheap. It's mostly cheaper than the some diet, some cuisine. And secondly, especially because the fast food can operating for 20 and 24 hours whole day.
Yeah.
Especially during the night, people easily get hungry, and the fast food is an easy way to make you feel full.
Mhm.
And because the high calorie, high salt, and high oil, it can create happiness to some hungry, night hungry.
Good word, night hungry. Thank you. Okay, but I'm not quite sure if it's really related to psychology, to be frank.
We are not really.
So, for example,
Yeah.
normally when we talk about the price, it's more relevant to economy actually, or economic
But
theories,
because
right?
it's cheap, so
Uh-huh.
make you.
So psychologically, now you are trying to look at this thing not from the transactions perspective, but from consumers' motive behind it, right? Okay, that might work. That might work. Okay. Any different opinions on that or different ideas? Complementary, supplementary. Yes, please.
What you mentioned is because fast food makes you feel less burden. When you have to buy some food or when you have to feed yourself at
Uh-huh.
any time, you know when you walk.
So it's convenient, is it?
Convenient, and also it's affordable for most
Mhm.
of the people.
Right.
So when you consider to buy some food, you will have less burden. Then, like for example, if you walk into a country or a city that you are not familiar with,
Mhm.
and
it's always right to choose like McDonald's and this brand which you are familiar with. So I think maybe it's something related.
Thank you. I think you mentioned a very important point. For example, I always eat McDonald's. And the reason I buy it is very simple, because you get what you pay for, and you know the taste will always be the same, right? The Big Mac is Big Mac. No matter you buy it in Chengdu or in London or here in Brisbane, right? It will taste exactly the same. And there's minimal risk there. So now if you actually look at this from consumers' risk perception, let's say, for example, you go to a foreign country that you have never been to, and there are so many foods there and with different prices, and you're not sure if they're good or not, right? Let's say it's in the middle of the night, very few people are there, but all the shops, they're still opening, and you're not sure which one to patronize. Then probably you might wish to walk into McDonald's, KFC, which you have been familiar with, because you know the price, you know the ingredient, you know what it would taste like, right? So the chance that you make the wrong decision will be minimized, basically. Yeah, thank you. Economics. Any volunteer? Price, money, from that particular perspective. I think probably you guys have already covered that, right? It's cheap, relatively speaking. So the monetary consideration definitely will be part of that. In addition to that, any other ideas? Yes, please.
I think their price is on the base, which means everyone is affordable.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, if, for example, if I'm poor,
Yeah.
I will go to McDonald's to buy a $1 burger to make me feel not starving.
Can you explain again? Sorry, I didn't really get. I think I roughly understand what you're trying to say, but what exactly is the
affordable price for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the reason.
So basically cheap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Have you heard of a term which is called the Big Mac Index? So, for example, let's say if you are earning 10,000 Chinese yuan, right, in China, versus if you are earning, let's say, 3,000 Australian dollar in Brisbane, will you be better off or worse off when you move from China to Brisbane? In other words, of course, you can actually convert them into different currency, right? That's simple. You just look up the chart and then make the conversion. But will your purchasing power and subsequently your living standard be better or worse compared to if you don't make the move to the different country? It's hard to decide, isn't it? Because there's so many things that you have to consider, and there are so many factors that might affect that. So basically, the idea behind the Big Mac Index is that some researchers, I can't remember when, but it's probably like 10 or 20 years ago, they came up with this idea, right? Normally what will happen, and it has been verified as a general rule, is that you use your monetary income, the monthly income, you use that money divided by the price of a Big Mac, and then you will get a particular number. Normally, this number will tell you how wealthy you relatively are in this particular country or in this particular culture, right? So, for example, if you're making 3,000 Australian dollars, let's say if the Big Mac here is, I don't know, how much is it? $8? 7? Whatever. Let's say if it's 8, and then you get some number. And then you calculate, okay, if I'm earning 10,000 Chinese yuan, then $20 per Big Mac. And then I use that two numbers, and then I use a division again, make a calculation, and I see which number is bigger. Whichever is bigger means that I'm better off in this particular place. All right? And why is that the case? That might be actually due to the McDonald's price policy, or due to their way that they fix the price, whatever they do. All right? We don't know the exact mechanism behind it, but basically this is a way that it can actually help you to determine your relative purchasing power, local purchasing power, right, in a particular culture or in a particular country. So obviously, the monetary consideration, price promotion, right, they will all be relevant to that. History. This one becomes a little bit challenging now. Any volunteer on this one? History. How would you examine fast food consumption from a historical perspective? 50 years ago, do we have McDonald's? Probably, I'm not quite sure, but I'm very sure that 500 years ago, we didn't have McDonald's, right? And why is this thing invented in the first place? In other words, why do we come up with the idea that, okay, let's make something which is called fast food instead of the traditional way of cooking?
I think it comes from street food anyway. That already always existed. So it was like a way to make a big company out of street food.
Yeah.
It was convenient and it was almost the same characteristics, but
Yeah.
put on.
But it's more
Brand.
standardized,
Yeah.
right? It's basically produced by a reliable manufacturer with a reliable, trustworthy brand, so that the consumers know that, okay, not only it's convenient, we can buy it almost everywhere, but we also know that the quality will be stable, right? And the taste will be enjoyable, well, moderately enjoyable at the very least, right? And nowadays, because we have less and less time, we have to spend more time working, so we have less time to prepare food and to stay together with family. So we have to find some ways to speed up doing something, right? For example, eating. I don't know about you guys, but I have a very minimum standard for food when it comes to eating, right? My standard is basically eatable, editable, basically. And the second is not too bad taste, right? And then that'll be okay with me. I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's mainly for survival. Actually, if in the future, if someone invented something like a tube of nutrients that I could just directly squeeze into my mouth without eating, I would definitely buy that. Because for me, eating is like a burden, you know? I don't enjoy eating. So, sorry, but yeah, this is just me, all right? I'm not saying that this is a good thing to do, but for me, basically, I just can't believe that I spend so much time eating and so little time sleeping. I would rather do the opposite. But anyway, so with the evolution of the trends and how people value their time and how they seek the work-life balance, right? We'll see the changes in trends and how we actually manufacture the new products. Finally, geography. Again, very tricky one. To be honest with you guys, okay, normally when we study fast food consumption, it will be a bad idea to look at it from geography's perspective. But here we have to try. The reason being that we want you guys to know how to look at the same phenomenon from the different field of study or from the different theoretical perspective. So if you really try, even though it might be a stretch, but if you try, what kind of things can you think of that would be related to the geographic perspective when it comes to studying consumers' consumption of fast food? Any ideas? Yes, please.
So, McDonald's again,
Yeah.
it targets a different market in every country,
Uh-huh.
and according to that, they customize their burgers or whatever they're serving.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in India, they can't serve beef burgers, whereas in Australia, that's the most famous ones.
Oh, they come.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, because it's a religious thing there. So they know that the demographics or the geography
Okay,
doesn't
right.
suit it.
Uh-huh.
So they can't serve like beef or pork in
Mhm.
that way.
Right.
Whereas in Australia they do that, and I've heard like in Japan they have a different kind of menu.
Yeah.
So it's customized according to the country they target.
This reminded me that in China, I think about 10 or 20 years ago, they got something called a rice burger. So basically, they replaced the bread bun with the rice bun.
Yep.
And turned out that it's a bad idea because rice is not, it's really difficult to put them together.
Yeah.
So eventually it will just, yeah, it just fall apart and then it become a mess. But it's interesting, sometimes we try to see, okay, for this particular country or area, then consumers might actually have a different way to appreciate how food is manufactured or how food is served. And then we might look at that and then see how this can be used to facilitate manufacturing new products. Okay? All right. So basically, again, a reminder that when looking at a particular phenomenon, right? These are all the different perspective or theoretical frameworks that you can think of. For some particular effect, you might wish to use one other than the other, right? It doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive. They're not. First of all, they're supposed to be complementary. So for example, when studying consumers' consumption of fast food, you might look at it from psychological perspective, or you might look at it from the economic perspective. Or if you feel like, okay, the question is partially answered, I feel like something is still missing there, you might throw in a different, third perspective, right? Like in the UK, anyone from the United Kingdom? they introduced a sugar tax, I think, starting from this year. So basically, the idea is that because of the obesity problem, and if you drink the sugar-free drinks, then that'd be fine. But for some people, they prefer the natural sugared drinks because they feel like the flavor is much more natural, right? So in order to disencourage consumers to consume that particular product, the government decides that, okay, we can't prohibit the manufacturer from producing that. We can't do that. But what we can do is that we increase the price using the government force. So we impose something called the sugar tax. In other words, in addition to pay the regular price for the drink, now you have to pay a 20% or 30% sugar tax in addition to that. And now we're trying to use in the economic incentive to disencourage consumers from buying that particular thing, right? It's from an economic theorist perspective, it is working, but at the same time, we're actually also talking about policy making, which is relevant to sociology, right? And lawmaking. So basically, they are complementary to each other, and sometimes by using multiple perspectives or fields of study, we might actually better understand a particular effect or phenomenon, right? So when it comes to your group work, please feel free to choose any one of them or to choose a few and use them together, right? And like I said, they're supposed to be complementary to each other. And normally, when you are able to satisfactorily put them together, this will provide you with a better understanding of the things that you are looking at, okay? This is always the case. But make sure that you choose the right one, okay? And do it in the right way. So let's move on. I think that we spent a lot of time talking about this stuff. And here's another distinction between when it comes to examining consumers' behavior, and we got different names to call them. And here, for example, we use a positivist versus interpretations approach. But another way to look at it, which I believe would be simpler, is this. These two approaches, the first one, this positivist approach, basically means quantitative, right? In other words, when you are studying a particular consumption behavior, you might try to use some mathematical tools, questionnaires, surveys, to objectively and unbiasedly measure consumers' behavior. And you will be able to get some really reliable and stable conclusion based on that. However, for some particular tricky phenomenon, this one may not work, in which case now we are talking about the interpretive approach. So what this will happen is that you try to look at it from the qualitative perspective. You engage in in-depth interviews, you have a discussion with the participants, with the consumers. You try to understand why they are doing that, in which case you yourself will be involved in that, right? To give you a classic example of how these two approaches might or might not work, you heard about the firm Nestle, right? So basically, about, I think in the 1950s or 60s in the United States, traditionally, the coffee, the way that we make coffee is that we use the traditional brewed coffee, okay? You use the coffee machine, and then you gradually boil the water, and then you put the coffee powder in that, and then you make the coffee, right? That's a traditional way to do it, but it's time consuming. But the taste would be good, but the problem is that it's too time consuming. So the Nestle company decided that, okay, if this is too time consuming, then there might actually be a way to still serve consumers coffee, but at the same time, we want to save them time. So they came up with the idea of instant coffee powder. So what they have done basically is really simple and straightforward, right? You distill the coffee, and then you just dry them, and then make them into the powder form, and then you serve consumers this canned coffee powder. And in order to make sure that this were going to be a success, they invited the housewives, because back to 1950s or 60s in the United States, traditionally, the housewife would do the grocery, men go to work, women do the shopping and taking care of the kids, right? That's about 80 years ago, but at that time, that's basically what is happening. So they invited these housewives to the laboratory. The Nestle companies asked them, okay, there are 2 cups of coffee. One is traditionally brewed. The other one is actually produced from instant coffee powder. I'm not going to tell you which is which, but I want you to have a try to tell me which you like better. And not surprisingly, it turned out that most of these participants, they can't actually distinguish between these two. Some even claim that, are you kidding me? They are the same thing, right? In other words, what they have confirmed is that if we were to sell consumers instant coffee powder, then the taste would not be different compared to if you try to produce it from the traditional brewing process, right? So the taste would be the same, and it will be more efficient. And Nestle have found out a way to make the whole manufacturing and production process more efficient. So it will be cheaper. So it looks like everything is great, right? It's the same taste, but it's much more cheaper. And it actually took you less time to prepare for it. So why not? So after that, Nestle placed their products on the shelf in all the major supermarket chains in the United States. And now something bizarre happened. Virtually no one purchased that one. And now if you ask another group of participants, again housewives, to your laboratory, to taste this coffee again, and then you tell them, please tell me the truth. Do you really like it? And they're like, yeah, that's great. You know, it's cheap and the taste is exactly the same, and we like it. And are you going to buy it? Yes, we're going to buy it. That's what they said. But when you come back to the supermarket, if you observe what consumers were actually doing, no one purchased it. So what went wrong? Again, from the positivist approach, that's all you can do, right? You ask them, you give them questionnaire. Please rate the taste of the coffee. 1, strongly unpleasant. 7, extremely desirable and very tasty, you know. And everyone gave 7 virtually. But you have done all you can, and you also can make sure that they were telling the truth. There's no way that these guys, you know, engage in some sort of like conspiracy to tell you the lie. Okay, let's just screw Nestle company. Let's just tell them that we like it. Actually, we don't. No, they didn't. They did like the coffee. So you use your survey, you use the in-depth interview, you ask them whatever they can think of, and they basically all the message that you've got is that they will like your product, but the market performance suggested otherwise. So something apparently must have gone wrong. So how to figure it out? In this particular case, we have to abandon all these traditional approaches because just keep this in mind, all right? Whenever consumers tell you something, but when they actually, what they are doing is entirely different from that. And if you are sure that they are not lying, then we are talking about the distinction between conscious and unconscious mental state. In other words, when you are asking someone, what they are telling you is something that they can think of. It's in their mind, right? They can speak it out, they can basically think of it, and they can tell you. What's your name? You can tell me. But what you have dreamed last night is basically in your unconscious or subconscious state. And whenever you see a discrepancy or difference between people's behavior and what they think, it simply means that the unconscious and subconscious minds, they conflict and contradict each other. And now, apparently, if there is a contradiction there, normally your behavior will be determined by your unconscious brain, not your conscious one, okay? So in this case, we have to dig out something in their unconsciousness which cannot be fully expressed by their conscious mindset. So what to do? We have to use something which is called the projective technique. Projective technique basically is that if you can't tell me what you think, then just tell me what you think other people might be thinking. So they recruit the same group of participants back to the laboratory, but this time, instead of asking them directly, how much do you like it, they split them into 2 different groups. One group, they show a shopping list comprising numerous grocery items that housewives normally purchase, like baby formula, spaghetti, right? All sorts of stuff. And then in the coffee category, then it's a traditional coffee. The coffee beans, and then you grind them, and then you produce the traditional coffee. For the other group, they show them the exact same list of items, with one exception. The traditional brewed coffee is replaced by the instant coffee powder. And instead of asking them how much do you like the coffee, they ask a different question. What do you think is the personality and the lifestyle of the person that actually make up this shopping list? Tell me your feelings, tell me your perceptions, tell me what you think this person is like. And when they compare their thoughts and their feelings about this hypothetical consumer, they observe the critical difference. When the consumer is supposed to have purchased the instant coffee powder, consumers actually think that this housewife is more likely to be lazy, doesn't really care about the quality of life, like take shortcut, all right? These are all the negative perceptions that have been embedded into people's unconscious mind, but you constantly ask them, what do you think? Because they can't tell you. In other words, their negative perception of using instant coffee powder is probably because this product is so new that people haven't been ready to accept that. And they have the nagging suspicion that if you use that one, then you're not a reliable personnel, right? Of course, nowadays, when we look at these kind of interpretations, we find that it's hilarious, if not funny, right? It's stupid. Why would you think that way? But think about this. 80 years ago, the society was an entirely different world, right? People's perceptions are much more dogmatic. Think about this. Only housewives will do shopping. Men will not go to supermarket, right? So in order to change people's subtle and this kind of stereotype of consumers that are going to purchase the instant coffee powder, we have to change their mindset. We have to change how they view this kind of behavior. So Nestle, in the subsequent 5 years, they developed the different types of advertisement, trying to predict a middle-class family that, for example, went out for a picnic, and then all of a sudden they went out coffee, and then the housewife happily brought out some instant coffee powder and then produced some coffee, and then everyone is happy. And why they are using the middle-class family? Because that is precisely their target consumer group. And they want to emphasize to this group of consumers that, guess what? It's not a bad idea to use instant coffee, and it can give you great convenience if you really need this product. So after that, obviously, nowadays, we all know what happened, right? We all accept the concept of instant coffee powder, even though we might still have some traditional thinking that, yeah, instant coffee powder still tastes less delicious compared to the traditional coffee, right? You might have this kind of feeling, but at least now we don't feel like there's anything wrong if I purchase that one, right? It doesn't make me like a lazy or a bad person, right? I want it because it's efficient, just like fast food, right? And so basically when it comes to starting this kind of tricky phenomenon, especially when you see a dissociation between what people can tell you versus what they are actually doing, then we have to use something much more deeper than the traditional positivist approach. Positive basically means that you have a guess, and then you measure the data, and to say whether or not your guess is confirmed. If not, you revise your theory. You move on to the next stage of the data collection. But some other times, for some particular phenomenon, like the instant coffee, powder, consumption behavior, it's really difficult basically to make a hypothesis, to guess it at the very beginning what is happening, right? So you have to explore, you have to use the various psychological tools to actually to dig out what exactly is in people's mind, and eventually you'll be able to find out, okay, that is exactly what's happening, and here's our conclusion. So here's a recap of what we are going to cover today. You might wonder, geez, you spent almost 1 hour and a half, and now you haven't even started. Well, we have already started, okay? But we were just a little bit slow at the beginning because, like I said, the distinction between needs and wants, the way that we look at the particular consumption phenomenon, they are all the important things that are the cornerstone based on which we are able to suddenly introduce you guys all this sorts of stuff. Like I said, when it comes to the behavioral insight, we mainly are talking about the stuff from a psychological and economics perspective. And when we move on to the CCT, it becomes the history and the culture thing. And when it comes to innovation and innovative behaviors and how consumers view new products, we go back to the psychology and also from the economics perspective, all right? So we want you guys to have a clear mind of why we are doing this and what are the rationale behind the different steps when it comes to one topic to the other. Right now, I think it's 3:26. Let's take a short break, 10 minutes, and then we'll resume our class at 3:35, all right?
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's about the textbook.
Okay.
Last week, Claudia said that we won't be covering a lot of the textbook, so I'm confused. How much of the textbook do I buy it? Do I just borrow it from the library? What's the... If we're doing more than 50%, I'll buy it.
How much is it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. And there's no e version either. So and
Oh, there's no e-version.
I couldn't find any. I wanted to double check with you guys if there was.
I
but-
think first try to see if you can borrow it from the library.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically what will happen is this. If you read the textbook, then they will be supplementary to the lecture slides,
Okay.
basically. Yeah. But you should be fine even if you don't have it.
Okay.
Yeah. In other words, they're not critical such that if you don't buy or use a textbook and then just attend the lecture, then you're screwed. No, it doesn't
Okay.
work that way. For example, like today's content, I think only 50% of them are in textbook.
Okay.
And the other 50% they're not there.
Okay.
So basically, this one is the most important one in the lecture.
Okay.
And then textbook would be, yeah, try to borrow it if you can.
Okay.
And if you can't, then I don't know. I don't think it's critically necessary.
Okay.
Yeah. We call it the required, but
Yeah.
not really something
now I'm so
that you
confused.
can't do. Yeah.
Okay. So we're not going to be doing more than
The reason is
50%.
very simple, alright? Because me and Rakesh will be teaching you guys all the substance.
Yeah.
And Claudia, she will be teaching you guys how to do the videography, and also she will be coordinating like a group work, group conflict, this kind of stuff.
Okay.
In other words, when it comes to quiz and exam,
Yeah.
it'll be on me and Rakesh.
All right. That's all you need
Okay,
to say.
so
got it.
yeah,
Thank you so
got
much.
an idea, right?
Okay, yeah,
but
yeah.
when it comes to the group work, for example, when you got some group issues like your teamwork is not working and you want to change your group, and then you might consult her
Okay.
instead.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, guys, let's move on. So now, for the second half of our today's class, we're going to introduce to you guys some, I wouldn't call it theory, but there are some new discoveries or some new perspectives that we have gathered during the last 10 years, right? Last 10 years means after 2005, roughly, till today. And the first thing that we want to introduce to you guys is we traditionally, all right, not only marketers, but also the economic and the psychological theory, we view consumer as an active decision maker. Active decision maker basically means that you know what you are doing. You make your choice, and then you evaluate the consequence of your choice, and then you are going to consume it, right? It's simple and straightforward. But what we have discovered during the past few years is that normally what you are going to do not only will be affected by what you know and what you have actually seen and smell and hear, but also by some contextual or environmental cues that you might not even be aware, but they will fundamentally change what you are going to do. For example, this is a picture of the toilet, urinal basically, in the male toilet in Schiphol Airport. It's in Netherlands. So basically what happened is that, especially for the gentlemen, I think that we all know the phenomenon that sometimes in the toilet, especially for the urinals, right, there'll be some spillage, right, of things. And in order to discourage this, or in order to make sure that there's less mess in the toilet, there are many ways to encourage people to, I wouldn't say be more accurate, but let's say to create less mess, right? So for example, the traditional way, and that's highly popular in China, is that we try to encourage you, right? One small step forward means a giant leap of human civilization. But unfortunately, this sounds very grand and very exciting, but not many people are actually really affected by that, right? You might feel like, yeah, whatever, Will said, and then still spill over the place. Another way is basically to humiliate you, right? Such as you may not be as accurate as you think you are, right? You might do that, putting some small words and slogans that to try to persuade people. But again, it's less effective. It's still a mess. And what the Schiphol International Airport has actually done is that they draw a small picture of the housefly in the bowl of the urinal, and all of a sudden, according to their claim, all right, the spillage has been reduced by 80%. And to be honest with you, I don't know why they come up with that particular percentage. I can't believe that someone was actually hiding there. And then, okay, 8 drops, right? And then move on to the different toilet. Okay, this time only 2 drops. Great. I'm not sure how exactly they came up with the conclusion, 80% reduction of spillage. But one thing for sure, first of all, it was there. And second, it was really effective. And I personally actually, because I flew back from London to Chengdu, right? So I have to take a transit and Schiphol International Airport. So I myself actually went there, not because I want to use the toilet, because I want to see if the fly is there. And I can testify that yes, it is there. I almost took a picture, and that time someone else went into the toilet, so I gave up the idea, because otherwise, wonder, hey, what is this guy doing, looking attentively and that urinal with a mysterious smile on his face. That's creepy, right? So I don't want to do that. But I can guarantee that, yes, it is there, right? But why is that there? It's a little bit tricky, isn't it? Even so, sometimes, for example, we have been doing this and we know that it is useful, it's effective. But what exactly is the psychological mechanism? We're not quite sure. For example, some theorists claim, that's now the popular claim, right? But I don't believe that's accurate. Their claim is that because for male, they need something to aim at when they are releasing themselves. But think about this. If you need small target to aim at, then how about the urinal itself? It's much more bigger, right? It's much more easier to aim at. So in theory, actually creating this stuff here makes the target even more difficult to aim at. So why is that the case? Right? It's paradoxical. It doesn't make too much sense, does it? But one thing for sure, it is useful. And the thing about this, instead of providing you with all sorts of like information and persuasion, right, please do that, you won't do it. But if we make some subtle changes in the environment with very minimal effort, your behavior would be fundamentally changed. And why is that the case? Now we're talking about something which is called the choice architecture. And why do we have this particular term? It actually came from Rick Taylor, and this guy actually won the Nobel Prize in economics. But what he has been doing actually is not the traditional economic theory. He has been doing behavioral economics, right? And he coined the term choice architecture. We all know what choice is. Architecture means the designing of the choice. His argument is that if you want to influence people, sometimes persuasion may not be that effective because the message may not get through, right? We will know the information, but it's not persuasive, right? We're not affected by that. So he suggests that we should design the environment or the context of the decision making in such a way that if you give people a general push, which is called nudge, then people's behavior will be unconsciously affected without themselves knowing so, right? And why are we calling the term nudge? You know the idea behind it, right? It's like a general push. It's different from a push or even a shoving. It's like I slightly nudge you a little bit, and then your behavior will be subtly changed, even though yourself didn't really notice that. So for example, if there is a very crowded tram or subway, underground train, right, and it's highly crowded, and you're standing there, probably blocking someone else's path through, and then instead of actually shoving you, they gently push you a little bit, even without looking back. For example, you are listening to music, but you know that if there's a nudge behind you, it means that somebody wants to walk through and you have blocked their ways, right? So you move aside a little bit, and you will know that. Sometimes you don't even know that, okay, these people need to pass through, so they push me, so I need to step aside a little bit. You are doing this all kind of like automatically and unconsciously. But instead, if someone actually shove you or push you, you actually be highly annoyed because you think that it's not polite, right? It's very intrusive. So the idea behind the behavioral nudging is that we want the policymaker and the firms, when it comes to the marketing, to design the environment or the availability of the choices to the consumer in such a way that we are effectively affecting what they are doing, but without themselves knowing so. Why? Because if you can subtly influence their behavior, then that's basically the end goal that we have already achieved, right? But if you try to persuade them, then they will have to convey this knowledge or the information and to convert it into the behavioral consequences, which will take a longer time, not to mention the fact that it may not be as effective as you think it is. And to understand this better, we have to understand how exactly we make our daily choice and engage in daily activity. And generally speaking, there are two kinds of information processing when we are doing what we do, right? One is called reflective or automatic mode. Sometimes we use the term system one. If you read the literature, you will notice that many scholars or theorists, they have different ways to label it, but they are all the same thing. We believe that there are two modes of information processing. One is highly automatic. It's effortless, meaning that you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, exactly what I'm doing. You don't have to. It's unconscious, it's automatic, it's uncontrolled. Think about the way that you are walking. Many people, while they're walking, they are basically chatting with friends or playing with their mobile, right? You don't have to say, okay, now I'm moving my left foot forward and now the right foot. Actually, I guarantee that if you pay close attention to how exactly you move your feet, you will not be able to walk properly. Why is that the case? Because now you are actually dragging the reflective mind into your automatic mind, all right? And when these two interfere, normally there will be some disruptive effect, such that you will come to a pause and you will have to figure out how to reconcile these two parts together, all right? So basically, when it comes to the reflective or cognitive mode, that is basically what we call conscious or system 2 thinking. So for example, you might decide, okay, I need to do a further degree in marketing for my postgraduate study. I'm not sure which university I should go to. And then you look at all the list of unis, and then you evaluate their tuition fees, their teaching effectiveness, and how you are going to find a job, right? The future of the employability, stuff like that. In which case, then we say that you are doing reflection of your behavioral consequences. You are spending time, you are spending effort, and you have to weigh the pros and the cons for each option. All right? In your daily life, most of the time you are actually doing this automatic. Like when you are eating, you don't count, okay, how many times I have munched on this stuff. It's basically automatic, right? When you are talking with people, right, they are all automatic. But there are decisions that would be effortful, and you have to think carefully about the consequence and to spend the time and energy trying to figure out what is exactly is the best way to do it. And what is even more important is between the reflective and associative mode. These two can actually be converted to each other, all right? So for example, when you first time learn how to drive, you are basically using your reflective mindset. You have to remember the rules. You have to, okay, now is the time to brake, now is the time to accelerate. You have to think about that. But once you get used to that, all of a sudden, guess what? You start to, which is not a good thing, all right? You start to listen to music, you start to make phone calls while you're driving, because now your driving becomes automatic. It doesn't mean that it is automatic by machine, right? You are still driving it, but when you are steering, when you are braking, when you see the traffic light, automatically you stop. You don't actually think that, okay, here's a red light, I have to stop. You don't think about that. You don't actually tell yourself that. It's become automatic process, all right? So basically what nudging is doing is that instead of targeting at the reflective aspect of consumers' mindset, how about we tackle their automatic aspect, such as that whenever we are able to affect this particular dimension, then we will still be able to achieve the end result we want without actually going through this process, which will be much more time consuming, much more effortful, and most likely consumer will be reluctant to be persuaded by that, right? There's resistance, there's reactance. But if you can target their automatic aspect, we will be able to influence their behavior without going through all these kind of hassles and problems. Another concept, which is also very important, is called mental accounting. Well-known accounting, right? You go to a bank, you open your accounts, and there's a saving account, there's different accounts whatsoever. But basically what mental accounting does is that for people in general, we want to spend money depending on what kind of consumption purpose it is. So for example, if I buy a ticket to go to the museum or to go to the football match, then I will mentally consider this as a recreational activity. And that kind of money I spend on that will be different and feel different when I spend some money on education, right? So for example, think about this. You buy a jacket at the store, and the original price is $200. Now I'm telling you that, okay, I'll give you a discount, $100. You'll feel very happy, right? Because the 50% discount, you will feel like, yeah, you sent me a lot of money, right? It's a huge discount. But instead, now next time, if you're buying a house, which will be $500,000, imagine that the house agent tell you, guess what? Now I'll give you a big discount, $100 off. You actually feel really insulted, right? Because such a tiny discount compared to the price of the house. But theoretically speaking, from the economics perspective, you should treat them like they say, $100 discount is $100 discount, right? It's a money that you save for you, and financially, the consequence is the same. You are now financially better off with $100 richer because you're able to save that. So why does that make such a huge difference? Another example would be, let's say, if you just buy an ice cream from a supermarket. Right before you eat it, you drop it on the ground accidentally. Now, would you spend another $5 to buy the ice cream again? Many people will, but many people will not, because they will feel like, okay, I've spent my money on this stuff, right? Now I'm screwed. And I'm not going to repeat the same thing again, even though, I know that I want to eat that thing, right? But accidentally, I can't consume this thing because I dropped it. And if I spend another $5 on the ice cream, guess what? I feel like I'm paying twice the price to get the same ice cream, and I don't like it. So I'm not going to spend the money. But again, from the economic theorist perspective, what you should do is to ignore what has happened in the past and focus only on the future. Because what will happen is that your consumption experience should be isolated events across the time span. But frequently, for us, we frequently link what we are going to do back to what we have done in the past to treat them as if they are interrelated. But from the rational perspective, you should not do that, right? Another phenomenon is called loss aversion. Loss aversion basically means that we hate loss more than we enjoy gain. For example, I give you a gamble. Now there's a 50% chance that you will win $10, but there is another 50% chance that you will lose $10. Now would you take the bet or not? Will you? Or let's make it slightly more attractive for you guys. All right, let's toss a coin. Heads up, I will give you $15. Tails up, you give me back $10. Will you do that? You might think, yeah, 50%, 15, positive 15, 50% negative 10, right? So my net gain roughly should be $5, right? 15 minus 10, multiply 0.5. Then the prospect that I will be financially better off is $2.5 gain for sure, right? So you should take this bet. But guess what? If you ask this question to 100 people, theoretically, almost every single one of them will turn down this offer. The reason is very simple. Because the pleasure from gaining $15, the magnitude of this pleasure is less than the magnitude of the pain if you lose $10. And even psychologists and economists, they try to quantify the magnitude of loss aversion, and they got a coefficient of 2.5. In other words, if you are really indifferent between the loss and the gains, I have to make my offer in such a way that there is a 50% chance that you are going to win $25 versus a 10% chance of losing 10. And when it comes to that threshold, you will be like, okay, I probably feel like I'm going to take the bet, right? Of course, if you're going to win 50 or if you're going to lose 10, you definitely will take the bet. But no way when the win is under 25 or 20, you're not going to take it, right? Because you hate loss more than you enjoy the win when it comes to the same monetary size. And again, it should not be the case, right? From the economics perspective, losing money, winning money, you should just count the exact amount of money you are going to get or you are going to lose, right? So why do we treat win and loss differentially? Again, there's some psychological aspect that is at play there. Norms. This stuff have been developed by the psychologist called Daniel Kahneman. And his argument is this. Normally when we engage in daily behavior, there are two types of rules that govern our behavior. One is called laws, right? For example, don't kill someone. That's law, right? Because you know that if you do that, you will be punished and penalized. But there are some informal rules that normally are not dictated by the law, but we still believe that they are the rules that we should follow, because breaking them will make us and will make people around us feel bad. So for example, don't eat in the subway. I think except in a few countries like Singapore, I'm not sure, okay, I'm just guessing. But normally if you eat there, people will not be happy or pleasant, but you should be okay to do that, right? Eating or drinking in the train or in the car. And basically it will make other people unpleasant, but there will be no punishment by law whatsoever. But still, we feel that if we break the norm, it will be bad, right? We follow these norms and we follow these rules, even though they are not really formalized by the government. And how do we actually apply this thing in the marketing domain? Imagine this. You always buy an ice cream from a supermarket. Normally it's retailed at, let's say, $10 per carton, all right, $10. Now the retailer basically tells you that, guess what? Starting from tomorrow, the price changes to 12 instead of 10. What would you feel? Of course you will feel bad, that's for sure. And then you want to know why. And the retailer say, yeah, guess what? We don't like you, we don't like you looking. So that's why we want to charge you a little bit more. Initially 10, now 12. You will be really angry and you will boycott this behavior, for sure. I don't know about you, but I will. But instead, let's imagine that the retailers tell you, well, because due to the increase of the cost in the production, right, the ingredient that we use to manufacture the ice cream, they all increased. So in order to make sure that we don't lose money, we have to increase the price. We don't want to do that, but we have to. guess what? This time you will feel like it's now perfectly normal, and you will be willing to accept the price increase because you feel it is justified. The same effect, same price, same behavioral consequence. You buy it or you don't, but your feeling will be different depending on how they justify the price increase, right? So basically, they are all the norms that we have to be really careful when it comes to especially product pricing, right, and other marketing activities. And there's another thing which actually, I think this is a very good example regarding how norms can actually affect our behavior and actually contradict our traditional belief about how things should be done. So for example, in the UK, there are a lot of people that don't pay their tax in time for whatever reason. Sometimes they forgot. Sometimes they got the feeling that, okay, if I try not to pay this time, there might be a chance that they may not get to me, right? In which case, I'm saving money. So there are people that don't pay their tax in time. And normally what will happen is that the government will send you a notice telling you that, okay, if you don't pay the tax in time, the next time there will be some severe consequences, like legal prosecution, right? Actually, I myself received something like this when I was in London, but it's accidental, absolutely, because I didn't know that if in the United Kingdom, in England, right, if you want to watch TV, you have to pay something which is called the TV tax. Well, they don't call it the TV tax, they call it the TV license fee. If you don't pay that, you can't watch it. You still can watch it. That's the beauty of it, isn't it? You still can watch the TV program, but you are actually breaking the law, but you don't know you are breaking the law. So after a month or so, they sent me a letter telling me that, okay, there will be 3 steps, right? First, we give you 1 month to pay your money. Second, if you don't pay, we'll send some guys which will not look really nice to come to your house to collect the money themselves. And then you'd better pay it. If you still don't do that, then the 3rd step would be they will send you to the court of law and then whatever, you figure. And obviously, when I received the envelope, I freaked out. I immediately pay for it because I don't know. Like when you watch TV, you have to pay the license fee for that. I didn't know that. It's like £100 per year, which is not too expensive anyway, but I didn't know that. But when it comes to this particular situation, tax avoidance, if you don't pay your tax, we'll send you a warning letter telling you that, guess what, there will be something nasty happen if you don't pay it. Now, 68% of people actually responded meaning that they freak out and then they pay the money. But then the UK government figured that, okay, they might not be the best way to do that, right? People will pay, but at the same time, they will hate you because you're threatening them, right? If you don't pay, we will give you some trouble, you don't want that, so pay the money. Of course, it will work, and actually, this percentage is already high enough. But they were thinking that, will there be some other ways that can increase the effectiveness of asking the people to pay their tax, while at the same time, make them feel less bad. So instead of threatening them, they send different messages to them. Actually, it's a 3-step process. They have done this in 3 different regions. In one region, instead of threatening them, they told them that, okay, actually over 94% of the UK citizens paid their tax in time. In other words, you are the 6th person who actually didn't do this behavior, and it's not really good, isn't it? And then they will see a tiny increase, which is 5%. You might wonder, 5%, it's just a small one. Think about this. What is the population in a country? It can be huge. So when you multiply the change of the percentage with the base rate, the population, it's actually a dramatic improvement, isn't it? But what could be even better is that now instead of telling you 90% of all the people living in the UK, I try to narrow down the scope. Now I tell you that actually 9 out of 10 citizens living in your postcode code or even your neighborhood, they actually pay their tax in time. And the narrower the physical region, the more likely people are going to collaborate. Why? This is because of the norms, okay? Because you feel like, okay, the smaller the geographic region, then the stronger the feeling of group membership, right? People live in the same areas, we're all neighbors. If my neighbors have been doing the right thing, I should have done that. I should have done that as well, because if I don't, that means that I'm breaking the norm, and that's not good. That just made me feel uneasy. So I should do what other people are doing. And the reason that they actually came up with this idea stemmed from a research back in 2008, which was conducted in United States of America, where they tried to encourage people to reuse their hotel tower. So for example, let's say if you stay in a place for 3 days, and normally the hotel may not wish to change your tower, right, in the bathroom. Of course, they are supposed to change it, but it's just you using it, so why bother, right? If you don't change it, they actually save more water and energy, right? So they want to encourage their guests to not to use the new tower every day, but to reuse a tower that have used the previous day. But in order to do so, they have to use different message. So for example, they came up with the idea that people living in the same hotel reused their tower, and they found it to be somewhat effective. But what is even more interesting that when they told them that the person that has actually stayed in the exactly same room before you moved in, he or she has reused the tower. They didn't say anything else. They're not saying that please do the same. They didn't. They just say that the previous guests have done this. Would you do that or not? It's up to you. And then they found something similar like this. They see an increase in the reusage of the tower. And basically that's the power of norms that we use to encourage people to follow a certain pattern because someone else who you can identify with, be it the group membership or the family or whatever, have actually done the same thing. And we don't like to break the norms, right? Because we feel like that is what is keeping our society and what is keeping the whole world working. So if someone else is doing the same thing, which we believe to be good, we'd better follow suit. So here, let's take a very short break. Not necessarily break, I mean, not asking you guys to go out and enjoy yourself. Let's have a second discussion of, think about this, choice architecture. How can that be used when you want to tackle some tricky issues like, for example, obesity? What are you going to do if you were the policymaker, or let's say if you're the local government? You see an increase of the obesity in schools, like for the young kids and small children. You want to tackle this problem. And you find that, okay, I might persuade the parents, I may even directly persuade the kids, but they're not quite working well. So if you were to use the theory from the choice architecture, especially people's decision-making, comprising both the reflective and automatic mode, how are you going to use that one to better influence people's behavior such that the obesity will be reduced? Let's take, I think, 5 minutes to discuss about that. Yes, please talk about it from the policymaker's perspective. In other words, please don't assume, okay, I'm the parent, and now I'm going to force my kids to be on diets. No, don't do that, because that's not really the idea behind it, right? We're talking about the global, macro perspective.
Someone was looking at them, so they wanted to donate more because they wanted to, like the other person, yes, not the person think that they were better, you know. So, for example, children in school, so when they're they can see that people looking at them, saying like you're not supposed to be giving anyone more, they may like throw it down on my team. do that at home. Many at home, they already have the parents very like convinced that's counting. But where they're not the parents at school, right? They look shocked by
I'm trying to picture it as school.
Yeah, you pay. I think everyone pays, but I think government has other regulations on that because it's easy for children. So they have to regulate what they can share, what they can in the school. Oh, I'm lawyer, yeah.
Phrase.
Like all your food.
Yeah. It's kind of like
Yeah.
yeah, not like that. It's like when it comes
Cheaper in the beginning of the road, so people will feel the place, and when they go to the they don't have enough tickets. They will pay.
Okay. Anyone volunteer? What is the possible form of choice architecture that you can think of?
I did that because I wanted to make high school so different.
Anyone wish to contribute? One form of the choice architecture. Imagine that you are making the school policies. One thing for sure, right? You can't ask the kids to not to eat ice cream, to ban the food. You can't do that, right? Because you still have to give them the freedom to make the choice. You can't simply say that, okay, starting from tomorrow, guess what? All our lunch and supper will be cabbages and apple, nothing else. And I guess that, guess what? Starting from tomorrow, all kids, they will drop out because they don't like it. But still, you want to encourage them to eat more healthy food. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you are actually targeting their automatic aspect of the information processing. In other words, you've done persuading the kids not to eat that because you know it's not going to work and it's not really effective. Think about that. That's just little kids, right? So you can't give them a theory talking about, okay, if you do this, guess what, 30 years, you will develop this, that. They won't listen and they won't be able to appreciate that. So if you were actually, let's say, the school principal, for example, what would you do? Yes, please.
We can put some labels near the name of the dishes in the cafeteria. We can divide the labels into maybe green, yellow, and red. In the green one, we can say that healthy food. And the red label, we can say maybe high sugar alarm, something like that.
Thank you. So basically, you are trying to use like the traffic light system, right? Where it seems like, you know, like a stop sign, right? It's not good, and you'd better refrain from consuming it. Yeah, that might work. Or you might wish to label the food like this is for loser, that is for winner. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, you're just trying to use that message, right?
90% of your peers do not choose this dish.
Yeah, but do kids really know how to read these labels properly? You have to keep that in mind as well, right? But anyway, it's a good point. Thank you. Yeah.
Could you have the healthier food positioned closer to the kids and then healthier food?
Right. Yeah. So basically, you try to hide the relatively unhealthy food in such a way that they will still be able to find it, but they will spend more effort trying to find out where that is, right? Any other ideas?
Maybe finding out who the children admire, who they follow, who they would like to be like, and get that people to
be an endorsement, and advertisement,
to show them like what's their lifestyle. They do sports, they eat healthy, and they will try to imitate.
Yeah. So instead of telling them that, okay, this is the stuff you should eat, we basically depict a picture the person they like that are actually consuming that, in the hope that they will basically mimic what their person they admire or like would actually do, right? Thank you.
We had one over here as well.
Oh, sorry. Please.
Maybe we can place healthy food in the cute and fancy boxes, and place the deep fried food and the healthy one in the ugly or something in this box.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that's a very good point. Actually, I think some schools have been doing that already. So basically, they try to do something on the package to, for example, make some cartoon pictures or some attractive things that on the label, on the package, in such a way that the kids will like, okay, this is a cute apple, I want to eat that. Whereas when it comes to the relatively unhealthy food, they try to demotivate them by, for example, making them really boring packaging, right? And because kids are just kids, you know, they don't know what is good, what is bad, but they know what they like, that's for sure. So you might want to throw in something they really like, but it's unrelated to the eating. But when you put them together, they'll be affected. Thank you. Any other idea? Well, how about this? Default. Basically, what default means is that when it comes to some trivial decision, we sometimes don't bother to make the choice because either, first, we don't care. Second, we don't know which is better, which is worse. Think about this, organ donation. Actually, that's like a big thing, right? In many countries, we encourage people to donate their organs in case if you very unfortunately you have a car accident, you pass away, and we still want you to donate organs so that you can save the life of someone else in need of them. But how to do this becomes a tricky thing. Of course, you can encourage people, please donate the organs, but some people say, yeah, I will do that, I will think about it, right? That's their normal reaction. But think about this. This is actually a paper published by some researcher at Columbia University in 2005, and it's in the Journal of Science. And the methodology is super simple, but the finding and the conclusion is dramatic, it's groundbreaking. So basically, in some countries like Denmark and Netherlands, the donation rate is roughly, as you can see here, roughly 10 to 20%. But in many other countries, again, which is geographically really close to these countries, for example, Austria, compared to Germany, their organ donation rate is almost 100%. Actually, it's not only for Austria. If you look at the countries here, they're almost always 100%. And this is in drastic contrast to Germany and the UK and Netherlands. And that doesn't make sense, does it? Because if you look at it from culture perspective, from history perspective, from geography, anthropology, they don't give you the answer, right? Because people are really similar. They speak similar language. And even some people, for example, they work in Germany, but they travel back to Austria because these countries are close to each other and they actually have their home in a different country, right? So why is that the case? The reason is very simple. In the first 4 countries, the policy is that the default is if you don't sign the form to declare that I don't want to donate my organ, I want to donate my organ, then I assume that you don't want to, unless you actively register to become an organ donor. Whereas in the other countries, the opposite is true. The government will assume that you are willing to donate the organ unless you actively submit a form saying that, guess what, I'm not going to do that. And for whatever reason, it turns out that they can make a huge difference in the percentage of the people that voluntarily donate the organ. You can't force people to donate organ or not to donate organ, but if you change the format of making their decision, this will be a huge difference, right? In other words, if you just make a subtle change in the framing or in the wording of the situation, submit a form, and then otherwise assume that you would do this, then this will be a huge difference here. Why is that the case? In other words, what is the requirement for this kind of default setting strategy to be effective? Will you be able to figure it out here? And by asking this question, I'm not really asking this from a theoretical perspective or ask you guys to think of theories to explain that. Just try to picture yourself in these 2 situations. If you were one of the citizens there, why do you think that this would drastically change your behavior? What is likely the prerequisite situations there?
Actually, both choices are the easiest choice, right? In both cases.
Yeah. It's super easy. Actually, so for example, if you don't make any change, we'll assume that you are either here or there. So first of all, the format is simple, right? Second,
Either the person is lazy.
the person is lazy. Yes, thank you. Actually, it's a very important point. Sometimes people hate to make a decision because first, the decision is difficult. They just don't know which one to go, right? If I donate an organ, of course it will be beneficial to the society, but at the same time, it feels like, yeah, someone's cut me open, when when I'm dead, and then I just don't like it. Especially, for example, in China, we always got this kind of feelings that when you're dead, right, you'd better be buried or cremated as a whole. Otherwise, that's something called a 死无全尸, which is not good. Meaning that you are dead, but with your body not really intact, and that's considered as kind of like miserable, right? So there's some culture issue there as well. But the second prerequisite, basically, is that people are actually not quite sure which one to go. So basically, they will go whatever the default is. So for example, let's say if you go to a restaurant, you're not super hungry, right? You just feel like, yeah, I want to eat something, but I'm not quite sure which one to eat. And then the waitress happened to suggest you that, okay, how about this particular one? It's popular. Everyone ordered it. What's going to happen? It's very likely that you will say, okay, just give me one of these. But if they have suggested you something different, you definitely would have ordered that different thing as well, right? Because for you, you basically have no idea which one's better, which one's worse, either because you're too lazy to figure out, or because you are not sure which one is indeed better. So you basically take whatever has been offered as a default, all right? So by understanding that sometimes humans were unable to make active choice, then let's just make the choice for them. And this will drastically change the behavioral consequences. But here's the catch. There's a prerequisite condition, and actually I have already described it, but I'm not sure if you guys have noticed that one. But think about this counterexample. So the Australian government, I can't remember when, but they started this activity. They feel like, okay, we want to keep the person's health information on record, right? We want to do that. And apparently some guys in their department have read about the theory of default setting. So they were like, yeah, sounds like a good idea, let's do that. So they changed, initially your health record will not be kept on file by the government. But the government feel like, okay, if people are lazy, they don't make their choice. How about that we subtly change the settings such that your health information will be kept on record by the government unless you log online and then to change it. And what they were expecting is something like this. But no, unfortunately, not really the case. Let's say if 5% of people agree to this one, then by changing the default to automatically keep your information on profile unless you opt out, then I think I read the newspaper that on the morning, there's always like outrage of the population, and then many people just phone the department and say, hey, what the hell? I'm gonna change my record, just take it off, you know? I can't accept that. I don't want my information to be kept secretly by you guys. Take it off. In other words, if it is 5% of people willing to keep their information by the government, then by changing the default, I'm not sure if it became worse or what, but definitely it didn't get better, right? That morning, a lot of phone calls came into the center, and the rumor is that they have to wait like an hour and a half. Sorry, your call is very important to us. Please hold on. We'll get you to the next person as ASAP, and then you wait for 2 hours. You're still waiting. But one thing for sure, many people, they were extremely unhappy. They want to change it back to what it was, namely, my information being not recorded by you. But why is that the case if you compare this to? When it comes to organ donation, it seems like a big deal as well, right? But using the default, you can drastically change the consequence. But when it comes to this particular example, it doesn't work. And it doesn't make too much sense neither, right? Keeping your information of your health versus whether or not you're going to donate your organ. They both look like a big deal, basically. And why, in this case, it backfired, basically, but not here. Any particular reason for that? Actually, I think the answer is really simple and straightforward because we have already mentioned that. Because the condition that for the default setting to be effective, the prerequisite is that people are not sure which one to go, right? They are either undecided or if they are either lazy and they don't care. But in this case, apparently there is a very strong preference at the beginning already. In other words, people don't want their private information to be kept by the government. That's already happening. So no matter how you change the default, people will still revert back to their original preference because they know what they like. So whatever you change the choice format, they will still stick to their original preference. So it won't work. In other words, for the default setting to have its effect, you'd better first make sure that people don't know what they like. Or, second, they're not sure and they are lazy. Otherwise, if they know what they like and they got a very strong established preference, then the default setting is not going to work, right? So it actually goes back to the original principle underlying the nudge idea. Nudge basically means that you give people a gentle push. Think about someone standing on the edge of the cliff. They're basically at the tipping point, such that when a small, very small external force will drastically change they go left or go right. But if they are standing very still and firmly on the ground, knowing that's where they want to be, no matter how you nudge them, that's not going to change it. They require shoving or pushing, right? So this is the basic idea behind the default setting. Priming. This one is, again, another tricky thing. It was discovered by a professor called John Barr at the University of Yale. And he came up with the idea, I think, in 1998. The idea is very simple. We do things because we want to do it. But out of all these activities that we normally do, majority of them are basically unconsciously taken. In other words, you do something not really because that you want to do it, but because it's basically automatic. And because if it is automatic, then there must be some way that I can influence you without you noticing. So for example, if you are talking to someone and then accidentally that one is picking his nose, then 9 times out of 10, you will pick it as well. Not necessarily because you want to pick it or because your nose is itching or because you like that person or you dislike that person. It's called behavioral activation, right? Because this kind of behavioral pattern is stored in your mind already, such that when there is a cue in the environment that is actually activating it, then you will automatically engage in that behavior. So here, let me show you guys a classic demonstration of the priming effect. Actually, it was originally an experiment done in the Yale's psychology department, but then BBC replicated the study in the United Kingdom in a non-academic environment. But the idea and the design of the study is basically the same. So take a look.
Our first experiment is about a psychological phenomenon called priming. Every day we absorb thousands of messages from the world around us, which have a profound subconscious influence on how we behave. This is priming. Psychologists have claimed that these messages can even influence how old we feel. Michael wants to investigate this claim and has asked UCL psychologist Daniel Richardson to restage a famous experiment in priming.
Morning.
They'll be asking a group of students to complete a word puzzle game.
Their job is to flip these over, they're just like big fridge magnets, and make a sentence from those. Key to the experiment is that there's something hidden in all of these words that will hopefully activate their concept of old people.
Michael wants to test if simply exposing the volunteers to words associated with the elderly, such as wise and alone, actually make them behave as if they're old themselves.
And then they think the experiment is over. We say, go off, you've got to sign one more form. But actually that's when the experiment begins from our perspective. Because they leave this door and then we time how long it takes them to walk down that corridor. And our hope is, because your stereotype of old people is that they're slower and doddery and frail, and you yourself will act slightly more like an old person.
The volunteers will be tracked over a distance of 20 meters with invisible lasers, allowing the team to pinpoint precise differences in their walking speed before and after the test.
Okay, I think we're ready to go. This is going to be marvellous. Okay, could we have Edith, please?
This is the testing room. Do come in. So, begin whenever you're ready.
But will these elderly-sounding words have any effect? The first volunteer isn't quite influenced the way the team were expecting. She seems to bound up the stairs.
No real difference between going out and going in?
Luckily, there are more volunteers lined up.
Okay, Michael, if you can take a seat in the chair in the middle of the room, please.
And soon, an interesting trend starts to appear.
How was that?
He was just ever so slightly slower.
Oh.
This volunteer walked along the corridor 10% slower after the test.
So, as you know, this is a test of your language proficiency.
It took this volunteer 20% longer to walk out.
Really does make you think the extent to which your approach to older people and how you see them is
right.
being projected.
Yeah, and of course, old people experience this, so when you walk into the room and you meet someone who's elderly and you start thinking about them, you will slow down a little bit. So their experience will be of people slowing down whenever they meet them.
Right.
So your behaviour feeds back to them as well. So as you know, this is a very simple test of language proficiency.
But to really test their theory that we're influenced by the words we use, Michael and Daniel now want to investigate if there's an opposite effect for youthful-sounding words. Will these volunteers be racing down the corridor after their tests?
Yep, he went in perky, he came out perky.
This volunteer walked out 10% faster than when they walked in.
Pretty fast going in and even faster going out.
The final volunteer's walking speed increased by 15% compared to her entrance.
She did a little sprint as she came down the corridor at the end. It's so unlikely that basically a few words planted here and there could actually influence how you think about people.
Hello. So basically that's the design of experiment. Did you get the idea behind it? So priming, what that means that, for example, in that particular experiment that we just showing you guys, we show participants the different words that are related either to old people or young people. And obviously we didn't tell them that, okay, if you have done this, then you engaging in a behavior similar to elders or young people. You don't tell them that. But instead, when they are actually looking at these words, then the concept of being old or young will be activated, such that your behavior will be consistent with the concept that has just been activated. Right? Another example here would be, for example, if I'm showing you this to ask you to complete this word, right? S, O, and P, and you can fill in the missing letter here to make it a complete word. If I show the exact same missing word, but with different contextual information, for example, here is related to food, and here is related to like shower or bathroom and shampoo, then most likely in this situation you will fill in U, soup, but here you will fill in soap, S-O-A-P. And why is that the case? Theoretically speaking, these two should be equally likely to be remembered or recorded by you. But by making the context slightly different, the concept related either to food or hygiene will be activated. And in turn, this will activate either soup or soap, food or hygiene products. And then this will become more obvious in your mind. Okay? So basically, priming is just the way that we try to use the subtle cues to affect the people without their noticing. So now please take, hopefully we're not running out of time. So please take 2 minutes, right? Just consider it as an IELTS test. 2 minutes to read the handout, the consumer insight, and then to look at it about the priming. And then we've got some quick question for you guys. Imagine if you try to encourage people to save more energy, like water, electricity. How are you going to use priming to achieve the same goal? Okay, time's up. Sorry, it might not be less. It may not be 2 minutes, but whatever. I think you don't really have to read through the material to be able to get the idea. So please think of any particular ways that you can use the priming technique to actually to encourage people to save water, for example. The traditional way is to post advertisements telling people that, if you don't save the water, then in the future the kids will be, suffering and our future generation will be doomed, which would be effective, but to a very limited extent. But if you were trying to use priming to affect people's consumption behavior, what would you have done? An idea? In other words, you don't want them to know that they are persuaded, but you still want them to do the behavior you want them to engage in. How do you do that? Yes, please.
Probably expose them to a story before asking the question when you conserve water now. Like, for example, show on the other side of the world where people are starving, stuff like that. You don't have access to clean water.
Yeah.
And then here in Australia, you have access to everything, basically, and then you ask the question afterwards.
Yeah. So basically, you were trying to show this information before mirroring their water consumption attitude. Is it? Yeah. That would do in that experiment. But let's say if you're the government, and if you want to encourage people to save water, and apparently you can't ask every Australian resident or citizen to go to a lab and then ask them to read the material and to measure their attitude. First, it's unrealistic, and second, you are basically affecting their attitude, but what you ultimately want to change is their behavior, consequently, right? So how are you going to achieve that goal? And remember this, right? Priming is not really about advertisement or explicit advertisement, right? It's different. Explicit advertisement means that we tell you specifically the message. We want you to absorb the message, and we want you to know at the same time that we are persuading you. But the priming is precisely the opposite. We are giving you the information, but we don't want you to know that you have been imbued with the information, and we don't want you to know that you are being persuaded, even though we are trying to influence you. What can you do? Yes, please.
Fake news with
fake news
shortage.
Okay, it might be unethical, but sounds like a good idea, isn't it? So, for example, warning: next year all the Australian major cities will be out of water, right? So now immigrate to Canada, for example, or save water. Yeah, that might do. No, probably not the best idea, but I think it might work. It might work. It will free people out, but it might work. Yeah. Yes, please.
By giving them a later on view of how it would be if you don't do it at this stage.
Yeah.
So putting out ads, or like we have all kinds of technological help, media helps. So
Yeah.
putting out that visual
Yeah.
so that they can experience just by looking at it. If not, we do it today.
Yeah.
So that's how you'll end up.
But then how would that be different from the traditional way of persuasion then? In other words, I tell you, if you do this, there will be a desirable consequence. But what you've been suggested is that if you don't do this, then there will be some undesirable consequences, isn't it?
But having a visual of that and
Yeah.
listening to that makes a different impression. So even if there's no audio to it,
Yeah.
but having a
But then
visual-
what is your cover story when you are showing this to the consumer or to people?
depends on the demographics we are
Yeah.
targeting. So if we talk about Australia altogether,
Yeah.
we can actually
And when you
talk
are showing that, what is the background information you provide to the people?
maybe the drought that happened
Yeah.
in 2012.
Mhm.
So giving a scenario of that and putting it into future, this was experienced,
Yeah.
and that is what you'll end up in. So it's the line you choose.
Thank you. Actually, I think that you are on the right track. How about this? We frequently put on TV some news about the drought happening in some other country. We frequently broadcast this kind of information. We're not telling you that, okay, this is going to happen in Australia in the future, but I'm just showing you the consequence and all the disastrous situation that other people experience because they are running out of water. I'm not telling you that now this is what we are going to suffer, but I'm just showing you this. And then you will know that, okay, there might be something terrible happen if this is going to happen here. You are actually engaging in the reasoning yourself, and then probably next time when you are taking a shower, you will take 5 minutes instead of 10. Even though you don't actually know that this news there, first of all, they're not fake news, they're real one. And the second, you don't even know that these are actually the messages that are used as advertising purpose. You thought that they are the news information, like the information we normally get from newspaper or from the website. But actually the purpose is persuasion. It's not really for knowledge broadcasting, like, okay, here is the drought in Africa, here's the drought in India, I'm telling you this. No, it's not. I'm just telling you that this might happen again here if we don't take active precautions, right? So basically that is a way that we can use to nudge consumers to engage in some behaviors that we desire, but at the same time, we don't want them to know that they are persuaded. Why is that the case? Because if they know they have been persuaded, the effect will backfire. It will backfire. Because there is something called promotion or persuasion reactance. When people know that they have been persuaded, and they might develop some psychological mechanism to defend against it. But would there be any unethical consequences? Let's say if all the firms all of a sudden they start to do these kind of things like priming. I prime you to like Coca-Cola or Pepsi more. Can they do that first of all?
I have an idea. Like
Yeah.
In China, or we have some dumpling restaurant that have a glasses, and the customer can tell they are making the dumpling right now.
Mhm.
They will presume like the dumpling is so fresh
Yeah.
and it's safe. And actually, the restaurant one of the customer know the dumpling is made.
Yeah, food hygiene.
Yeah, it's the same thing like a sushi hub. They making the sushi in front of you, and you will think the ingredients are fresh or on the same day.
Thank you. Yeah, that at first glance, that doesn't sound like a problem, but actually it is, right? Because we're trying to tell you something that we want to tell you, but in a very subtle way, such that you don't know that this is intended consequence, but you are actually affected by that because you are feeling what we want you to feel, right? But then in the commercial world, we would be able to do that without consumers noticing. And if we do advertisement using this technique, have you ever noticed that when it comes to advertisement in the real world, will there be any advertisement that actually have used priming? If you can think of any, well, that would be tricky because the idea behind priming is that we don't want you to notice that. But we know that there are people extremely bored in the world and they pay extra attention to stuff we normally don't pay attention to. So here, let me show you another example that have actually used priming, but has been actually detected by someone. Take a look to see if you are able to see that. Again, the reason we call it priming because it's supposed to be subtle, right? But actually, there is the message. So starting from here. So basically, this is like Iron Chef thing, right? Like the cooking and competition stuff. Like I cook, you cook, and let's see who do it better, stuff like that. But then in this TV program, there is a priming message that has been inserted into it. Let's see if you can spot it out. Just like a normal TV program. No advertisement whatsoever. And first glance, do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you see that? Take a look again. There you go. Do you see the flash?
Yeah.
Here's a slow motion. Picture by picture. There you go. And then they move on to the next picture, which is supposed to be the program. So it's McDonald's. And would that be effective? Well, there's some controversy over that, right? The theory basically holds that if people see the logo or the brand image of something that is in a related context, for example here, it's about food preparation, and then you see a picture of McDonald's, then most likely after watching this TV program, if you decide what to eat and if you happen not to want to cook, then you might order McDonald's instead of KFC, at the very least, right? But here's the problem, is that ethical? Depending on the country, right? For example, in the United States, sorry?
It's illegal in some countries,
Yeah. For example, in the United States, the regulation is that you can't do that. The reason is very simple. Priming means that people has been persuaded without their notice, and this is not acceptable for marketing campaign. In other words, if you want to persuade the consumer, then you should let them know that they have been persuaded. If they don't notice that you are trying to influence or persuade them, it's unethical, right? But in some other countries, probably there is no such regulation, or probably because the policymaker, they don't believe that this is going to work. But whatever the situations, basically nowadays, there's still some practice in the real world that we see from time to time using the priming technique to affect the consumer, right? But you have to be really careful. You'd better check the laws and regulations in the local area before you even do that, right? Not to mention the fact that the effect may not be long-lasting, because the priming, the timing is very important. Starting from the time you prime the participant to the time that you want them to engage in this behavior, the duration or the break of the time should be relatively short, right? If it is, for example, you prime today and you want to see what will happen tomorrow, probably it won't work, right? In other words, you show the message and immediately want to see the consequence. If you really want to induce a long-lasting behavioral consequence, then you will have to frequently, repeatedly prime them, okay? But obviously, that's a different story here. Okay, I think that we are approaching almost the end of the lecture, so let me quickly give you some other emerging trends. I will just quickly cover them before I dismiss you guys. Another trend started from 2005 and now becomes a mainstream research in consumer behavior is called consumers as experience seeker. All right? We traditionally always assume that, for example, when you buy coffee, you want to drink it, right? You're paying money for the coffee. But why do we sometimes have some like coffee shops like Starbucks that will install the chairs and a comfortable sofa with good Wi-Fi connection? Why are we doing that? Because sometimes for some consumer, when they go to a coffee shop, not only they want to buy the product, they also want to relax themselves, to enjoy the environment, right? They're paying both for not only for the price, for the product, but also for the experience associated with it. So experiential marketing basically claims that sometimes, for some particular phenomenon, we can't look at it from the traditional cost-benefit perspective. You pay what you get for. That's probably true. But for some particular emergent, especially nowadays, there are some things that can't be satisfactorily explained by the traditional perspective. So for example, like the soccer fans, I actually play football myself, but I normally don't go to the stadium to watch the football because for me, first of all, I'm not really loyal to a particular team because I don't know why, right? And the second reason is because I don't like a lot of people there, right? Because there are too many people and they are all shouting and, why not just sit in the air-conditioned room and then watch the, broadcast there? It will be much more comfortable and then you can zoom in, pause and then replay, which will be much more fun. But still, many people, they will go there because they want to enjoy the environment. That's the experience they are paying for. If you watch it at home, you don't pay anything except the TV license fee, for example, in the UK. But most likely, you're not going to pay anything. So why would people bother to take such a long trip, pay such a high-priced ticket, just to immerse themselves into this crowd? What are they actually trying to get out of this? For example, there's currently a popular, I wouldn't call it a sport, but it's something called Top Mudder. So basically a group of people, they would just go to some muddy place, like really, like running through torrents of mud and then plunging themselves into the water and then crawling under some electric wires and then to get themselves like, as if they are doing this purely for pain, right? They probably pay a price for that as well because they need some organizers to organize this event basically, right? But they are still doing that. And why are they doing this? So for example, you crawl through some muddy place, get yourself dirty, and then eventually you got some brushes or even broken bones. And actually sometimes death will happen. But still, I'm not saying that everyone will do it. I myself will not. But many people are actually doing that. Why is that the case? You might argue, okay, these guys, they just want to induce pain to themselves. But think about this. I can create this stuff in your bathtub, right? I will just basically dig out some mud around the local area, dump them into your bathtub, put in some water, and I will beat you up. And then you will be just as dirty and as frustrated as you are there, but you won't appreciate that. And I believe that it won't be called something like muddy bathtub thing, right? You won't like it, for sure. But why are people actually doing that instead of doing it individually? Probably we are now talking about something that is related to something called culture, right? There are a group of people that want to challenge themselves. They want to go through this process. They feel like this way they can actually enhance themselves so that they can better prepare for future challenge and better to endure pain. But they want to do this not only because the pain itself is interesting, but they also want to encourage each other. They want to immerse themselves into the environment, right? This is a cultural influence as well. In other words, experiential marketing to a great extent has been linked to the culture trends. And again, it will be culture specific, all right? So obviously we got a lot of stuff to cover, and so far I think that I've covered all the major themes and theories. And there's a lot of stuff for you guys to swallow, obviously, but I'm hoping that when you look back, you will see that they, sorry. 1 minute, please. 1 minute, sorry, yeah. It's not even 5. Anyway, so 1 minute. Next week, I will not be here because Claudia will be here teaching you guys about some videography things, all right? But importantly, please make sure that you register your group membership via Blackboard because you are going to do a group project afterwards, and then please by the end of next week make sure that you form your teammates and make the registration online, right? If you can't find your partner, just let Claudia know, and I'm sure that she will figure out and then to help you guys, sign you guys to the group. Okay? Alright guys, I still have something else to say, but unfortunately we're out of time, so yeah, that's it. Thanks for coming, and see you in 2 weeks.
Like that every week.
Sorry.
No, he's like that every week.
Should be 5 o'clock, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but how come that?
He does it to Claudia too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not just you.
Okay, thank you. It's good to know that, you know. So it means that actually we have to finish by 4:50 instead of 5. Then.
Yeah, that's usually late.
Okay, it's good to know that. Next time I'll be better at the timing.
So that one's good. I probably wouldn't print any more for the other two plate ones for this because they don't really use it.
Yeah, don't worry. Do you want me to collect it or?
But oh no, I'll just leave these to you.
Okay, cool.
For next time.
All right. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm very concerned now.
Leave that on, I'll fix that.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, you want me to keep logging the system or what?
No, don't. No, you log out. Just control log.
Okay, okay.
That one? Yeah. Log, sign out.
This one?
Yeah.
Sorry about that, I just got to prep a few things before the class starts.
Yeah, sure.
You know,
We're almost finished already.
Wasn't you on Wednesday? At
5. You don't really need to come at this time. You can come in half an hour or something if you want to, but you know.
Yeah, I might be going out in a second.
Huh?
My son, I tried to call my son, but kept hanging up. So.
That's all right. If you've seen this lecture. Yes, sir.
Mktg7503
Yes.
I don't want to choose the SO.
Sorry, what? You would say that again?
I want to choose this class.
Have you enrolled?
No. I enroll this lesson, but I don't choose the time.
Which time did you choose?
This one.
Well, then you shouldn't be here.
Shouldn't be here?
Well, these classes are crowded. We book people in, the first in, first served, and they stay here. So if you booked in for Tuesday, you can't just walk into this class. This class is full.
Then what time can I choose?
Tomorrow, which one have you chosen?
I don't choose. I want to choose this, but this is full. So I can choose this class.
Yes, but he enrolled late. Is that correct?
Yeah, I enrolled.
They all enroll late, and then they go to class, and they were full.
So which class? You have to pick a class when you enroll, though. You can't just.
No, they enroll, and then the sign-on comes on, and they then sign on, and the first class, the lunchtime class today, gets full quickly, and this one's full. So tomorrow evening.
Tomorrow evening is okay.
Yeah, 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock. I think that I can't keep it accepting people into this class because it will fill up and there'll be no seats about. Sorry to say.
No, yeah, this class is
Okay. I mean, you didn't email me at all. You haven't emailed me about it.
I emailed. I haven't.
When?
Yesterday night.
Sorry.
Something like that.
You emailed, not him. You.
And we emailed together.
How can we email together? One of you emailed. Yeah, and what did I say?
To open this. I say
Tuesday.
No, not Monday.
What? Did I say you come to Monday?
So can you show us the email?
I don't want to waste time on it. Everybody knows what they have to do.
Sorry?
I can't listen to say
Where's my response? Did I reply? Yeah. What did I say? I've let some in when it was lesser, and it looked like it was okay, because there were a whole lot of people moving out. I don't really want to waste time on admin things. Nobody should. Give me that. Where is my email reply?
Yeah, we have written from here.
Where is my email to you? Huh? I didn't reply. Okay, you've got to go to tomorrow's class. You can't do today. Sorry, I think that's reasonable. I mean, really. I'm just... yes. You don't want to go through this whole lecture again, do you? Just go and have a drink.
No, I missed the first hour anyway.
All right, well, you can G me on, clap and everything. I'll be back in a second.